In November of 2008, a team of paleontologists working the coastal desert south of Ica, Peru, was on the final day of their expedition when researcher Klaas Post spotted something in the sediment. Not a whole skeleton. Not even close. A single skull, roughly 3 meters long, with teeth still socketed into the jaw. It would turn out to be one of the most consequential single fossils ever recovered from the Pisco Formation, a site already famous for producing exceptional marine fossils. And by the time it was fully described, this one skull alone would be enough to establish an entirely new apex predator, one whose teeth remain, by direct measurement, the largest confirmed biting teeth of any animal ever found, excluding tusks. No body has ever been recovered, just the head, and that head turned out to be more than enough to cause a stir. The discovery came from an international team led by Christian de Mouizon of France's Natural History Museum, working alongside researchers from Utrecht University, the Rotterdam Natural History Museum, Italy's Museo di Storia Naturale di Pisa, and Peru's own Museum of Natural History in Lima, where the specimen was eventually prepared and now resides, catalogued as MUSM1676. The formal scientific description came 2 years later, published in the journal Nature on June 30th, 2010, authored by Olivier Lambert, Giovanni Bianucci, Klaas Post, Christian de Mouizon, Rodolfo Salas Gismondi, Mario Urbina, and Jelle Roymer, under a title that didn't bother with subtlety. The giant bite of a new raptorial sperm whale from the Miocene epoch of Peru. They named it Livyatan melvillei, and within days, that name ran into a problem nobody on the team had caught. A paleontologist named Mike Taylor, writing on a blog called Sauropod Vertebra Picture of the Week, pointed out that the genus name Livyatan wasn't actually available. Back in 1841, a naturalist named Albert Koch had already used the name Livyatan in a couple of spelling variants for what turned out to be an American mastodon, a fossil elephant relative, now recognized as belonging to the genus Mammoth. Under the formal rules of zoological naming, once a genus name is used, it's locked, even if the original animal it described later gets reclassified under a different name entirely, and even if almost nobody remembers Koch's mastodon a century and a half later. An entomologist named Doug Yanega flagged the same issue independently around the same time. So, less than 2 months after publishing the discovery of one of the most fearsome predators the Miocene oceans ever produced, the original research team had to publish an official correction. The Nature Corrigendum, released on August 25, 2010, formally renamed the genus Livyatan, the original Hebrew spelling of the same word English usually renders as Leviathan, and the Corrigendum closed by directly thanking Taylor and Yanega for catching the error. It's a small thing in the scope of the animal's whole story, but it's worth sitting with for a second, because it's a genuinely good example of how science is actually supposed to work in public. A mistake got made, it got caught fast, by people entirely outside the original research team, and it got fixed on the record, credited, without anyone trying to quietly bury it. The species name, melvillei, was never in dispute. It honors Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, whose title character spends the entire novel being described, more than once, as a leviathan. So, Livyatan melvillei. What was actually in that jaw? The skull itself measures around 3 meters long. Its teeth are the real headline. The largest recovered tooth measures 36.2 centimeters, and most of the well-preserved teeth in the jaw exceed 31 centimeters, which is an extraordinary size for a tooth by any standard. The animal also had considerably more of them than you'd expect if your only reference point is a modern sperm whale. At least 40 functional enamel-coated teeth total, distributed across both the upper and lower jaws, 22 below and 18 above. That matters because a living sperm whale today only has functional teeth in its lower jaw, with the upper jaw carrying, at most, small vestigial teeth that mostly never erupt. Livyatan had a full, functional, enamel-covered bite on both sides, top and bottom, and that's before you even get to the size of the individual teeth themselves. It's worth being precise about how those teeth compare to the other famous predator of that era, because the comparison tends to get flattened into a simple, bigger teeth wins headline, and the real picture is more interesting than that. Megalodon's largest reliably verified teeth run somewhere around 18 to 19 centimeters, meaning Livyatan's largest tooth comes in at roughly double that length. But these were built to do completely different jobs. Megalodon's teeth are broad, flat, triangular, and finely serrated along both edges, a slicing blade optimized for shearing directly through flesh and bone in a single motion. The same basic design logic you see in a modern great white shark's teeth, just scaled up dramatically. Livyatan's teeth are conical, deeply rooted and unserrated, built for gripping and puncturing rather than cutting. The kind of tooth wear pattern you'd expect from an animal, clamping down hard on struggling prey and tearing rather than slicing cleanly through it. Longer isn't automatically deadlier once you're comparing two completely different biting strategies. It just means these were two very differently equipped predators occupying the same general size class. Here's where the story runs into a limitation that's worth being upfront about rather than glossing past, because it affects almost every big, dramatic number attached to this animal. Nobody has ever found a body. No vertebrae, no ribs, no flippers, no tail. Every single length estimate for Livyatan comes entirely from scaling calculations based on that one skull, and the original 2010 paper itself is honest about just how much that limits precision, because it actually produced two different length estimates depending on which modern or fossil relative you use as your scaling reference. Using a modern sperm whale's skull-to-body proportions as the model, the team calculated a length of about 13.5 meters. But a modern sperm whale has an unusually elongated head relative to its body length compared to most of its extinct raptorial relatives, and Livyatan's skull is proportioned more like a smaller, extinct raptorial sperm whale called Zygophyseter. Scaling from that comparison instead produced a considerably larger estimate, somewhere between 16.2 and 17.5 meters. As of the most recent published research I can confirm, no peer-reviewed follow-up has replaced either of these numbers with a single settled figure. The honest way to present this animal's size is exactly the way the original describers presented it themselves. Somewhere in a fairly wide range, built entirely on educated scaling from a skull, because a skull, remarkable as it is genuinely all we have. What was it actually eating? The working picture, based on the anatomy of that skull and jaw, is that Livyatan was a macroraptorial apex predator, meaning it actively hunted large, mobile prey rather than feeding the way a modern sperm whale does, which is mostly suction feeding on squid in deep water, using a comparatively narrow, weakly toothed lower jaw. Livyatan's likely prey list includes medium-sized baleen whales, in the range of about 7 to 10 meters long, several of which are well documented from the same Pisco Formation sediments, along with probably seals, dolphins, and smaller sharks, occupying an ecological role that's often compared to a modern orca, just attached to a single animal large enough to potentially take on much bigger prey without needing a coordinated group to do it. But it's worth being clear about exactly what kind of evidence supports that picture, because it's not as direct as a lot of popular coverage implies. Nobody has found gut contents. Nobody has found an unambiguous set of Livyatan bite marks embedded in a baleen whale fossil. What actually exists is indirect. Tooth wear patterns consistent with heavy gripping and tearing, rather than gentle suction feeding. A 2014 study documenting bone growth abnormalities on the jaws of related raptorial sperm whales, consistent with the physical stress of grappling large, struggling prey. A 2025 study describing a strange, bite-shaped hole in the tooth of a different raptorial sperm whale that resembles a Livyatan attack, though that specific case, if accurate, would represent one raptorial sperm whale species preying on another, not direct proof of whale hunting more broadly. And there's a genuinely interesting complication worth including here, rather than leaving out because it muddies the clean version of the story. An unpublished isotope study presented at a paleontology conference in 2019 examined tooth enamel chemistry from a Livyatan specimen found in Chile, and that individual's isotopic signature didn't actually match what you'd expect from an animal feeding heavily on local baleen whales. It's conference-level evidence, not a full peer-reviewed paper, so it shouldn't be treated as the final word. But it's a useful reminder that the tidy image of Livyatan as a dedicated, full-time whale-killing specialist might be an oversimplification, and that diet may genuinely have varied by individual, region, or season, the same way predator diets do today. Now, the question everyone actually wants answered the moment they hear this animal existed at the same time as Megalodon. Who was actually running the show? Here's the honest answer, and it's less satisfying than the versions you'll find in most pop science coverage of this animal. The original 2010 description does state that Livyatan, alongside the contemporaneous giant shark Megalodon, probably had a significant impact on structuring Miocene marine communities as co-occurring apex predators. That's a real, published statement. What it isn't is a claim of direct head-to-head competition or confirmed evidence about which animal actually held the upper hand where their ranges overlapped. In fact, lead author Olivier Lambert, speaking to a science journalist around the time of publication, said directly that it's hard to say whether the two predators were actual direct competitors, since they may well have hunted in different parts of the Peruvian seas, rather than sharing exactly the same waters and prey at exactly the same time. Megalodon teeth have been recovered from the same general Pisco Formation localities that produced Livyatan, so real temporal and geographic overlap between the two animals is confirmed. But I want to be straightforward here, rather than oversell this. I could not find a dedicated, rigorous, published study that actually tests whether these two animals competed for the same prey or split it up by size, habitat, or hunting depth. The honest current scientific position is that both animals existed in the same general place and time. Both were plausibly apex predators. And nobody has actually published the research that would tell you who, if anyone, had the advantage. The "who would win" framing that shows up constantly in documentaries and video essays about this animal is a genuinely fun question. It's just not one science has actually answered yet. Livyatan wasn't alone in being a giant, tooth-heavy sperm whale, either, and it's worth placing it properly within its own family before wrapping this up. Through the Miocene, several other raptorial sperm whale genera show up in the fossil record, animals that, like Livyatan, kept large, functional, enamel-covered teeth in both jaws rather than losing the upper set, the way the modern sperm whale eventually did. Zygophysidae from Italy. Brygmophysidae from Japan, one of the earlier members of this general group. Acrophysidae, also from Peru, closely related to both. Livyatan is confirmed as the largest of this entire raptorial group, distinguished anatomically by a specific feature, the basin on top of its skull that would have housed the spermaceti organ. The waxy structure modern sperm whales use partly for buoyancy control and partly, it's theorized, for producing the powerful clicks used in echolocation and possibly in stunning prey. In Livyatan, that basin runs the full length of the snout rather than being confined to a shorter region toward the back of the skull the way it is in Zygophysidae and Acrophysidae. And a more recent phylogenetic analysis, published in 2025, adds an unexpected wrinkle to the family tree here. Rather than Livyatan simply being the biggest version of the same lineage that produced Zygophysidae, Brygmophysidae, and Acrophysidae, the new analysis places it on its own, more separate branch entirely, suggesting its massive size and its unusually elongated spermaceti basin likely evolved independently, converging on a similar giant, heavily toothed body plan, rather than inheriting it from a shared, already giant ancestor. There's one more genuinely recent development worth closing on, because it changes how big a picture we should actually be drawing around this animal. For years, Livyatan and its closest relatives were considered essentially a southern hemisphere phenomenon, largely restricted to Peru, Chile, and a handful of other southern localities, with some researchers proposing that a thermal barrier near the equator might have kept the group from spreading north. That picture changed in 2025, when researchers Watmore and Prothero described a roughly 25-centimeter tooth recovered from Mission Viejo, California, identified as belonging to Livyatan, or a very close relative. It's the first confirmed Northern Hemisphere evidence for this animal or its immediate kin, and combined with a broader reassessment of where paleontologists have and haven't historically looked for fossils this specific, it raises a real possibility that this genus, or something extremely close to it, had a far wider, possibly near global distribution than the original Peruvian discovery ever suggested. Scattered, isolated teeth reported from Argentina, South Africa, and Australia over the past several years point in the same direction, though most of these are cautiously labeled as closely related to Livyatan, rather than confirmed as the species itself, since a single isolated tooth often isn't enough on its own to say for certain exactly which animal it came from. So, an animal known to science from a single skull, no body, no confirmed length, a name that had to be publicly corrected within 2 months of its own announcement, a diet inferred mostly from tooth wear rather than direct proof, and a rivalry with the most famous predator in prehistoric pop culture that remains, honestly, completely unresolved. What isn't in question is the bite itself. 40 functional teeth, both jaws, the largest of them over a foot long, belonging to an animal that, even working from nothing but its own head, rewrote what paleontologists thought a hunting sperm whale could actually look like. Alright, since we're on the subject of ancient whales, next time we're going even further back, to an animal whose fossils were so strange when they first turned up that the person who found them didn't think it was a whale at all. Basilosaurus, an early whale ancestor, originally named under the mistaken belief it was some kind of giant marine reptile, a mix-up so influential the wrong name stuck permanently even after the mistake got sorted out. That one's next, and it closes out this run of sea creatures before we head back to dry land. Let me know in the comments what you want cataloged after that, and subscribe to Claw Catalog so you're here for it.